This story follows an aspiring designer who had to return home after failing to succeed in the fashion industry. Rightfully so, she is devastated to give up on her dream, but little does she know that her happiness is back home. In the opening scene, we see the talented Kristen Parson walking down the sidewalk in Los Angeles. She gets stopped by a homeless person who asks her for some change, but unfortunately, she doesn't have anything on her. Continuing her walk after apologizing, she looks at the framed $5 she made from her first sale and decides to hand it to the man. She is certain that it will do him more good than her. The man smiles and nods his head in gratitude, but little does she know who the man is. Returning home, she spends her day packing everything until her friend Haley comes to help. Haley is vividly upset that her best friend is leaving and just wishes that there was another way about it. Kristen is devastated as well, but she tries to have a positive mindset, despite her dream crumbling to dust. They're not the only ones upset whatsoever. Kristen's daughter Emily joins them in the living room with her written songs in her hands. She plans on throwing them away since everyone is throwing their dreams away, but Kristen assures her that there's lots of music in Ohio as well. Even Haley chimes in, despite not wanting to, and assures her that she will fall in love with the town as soon as she gets to it. Little does she know that she's right. In the evening, Kristen slides into Emily's room, only to see that she's still awake. Sitting next to her, she asks what's on her mind, and little Emily reveals that she's making sure she has everyone's emails so they can stay in touch despite being miles apart. Switching the topic, Kristen asks about her wishes to Santa, but it appears that Emily hasn't written her letter yet. Feeling sad, Emily believes that her wish can't be granted, which is why she hasn't written to Santa yet. To cheer her up, Kristen tells her all about the great things in Ohio, including her funny aunt, but soon she realizes that she's trying too hard. Eventually, she gets Emily to cheer up before tucking her into bed. However, later in the night, Emily wakes up to write a special letter. In the letter, she apologizes to Santa for being too late, but wishes for them to return to Los Angeles. Denying any gifts, she wishes to be back home because she feels so alone. The following morning, we see the mother-daughter duo on their way to Ohio. As Kristen is driving, she notices that Emily looks bored, so she suggests they sing Christmas carols so their trip won't be as boring. The once grumpy face has turned into all smiles as we see Emily enjoying herself for the first time since the beginning of the trip. By the evening, Kristen stops at a gas station where she decides to call her aunt. Her aunt is more than excited to see them, but because they're tired and Emily is already asleep, Kristen suggests they see each other in the morning. Hanging up the phone, her Aunt Sarah tells the handsome man sitting at the bar that her granddaughter is returning to town. Not even the man can believe that Kristen is returning, and he appears to be a classmate of hers. Looking at him suspiciously, Aunt Sarah remembers that he used to have a crush on her, so she smirks at him devilishly. In his defense, he reminds her that they were just kids, and that she never really looked his way, because he was a band geek. Finally, Kristen arrives in her hometown, and even in her adulthood, she's still fascinated by how magical it looks. Nudging Emily, she tries to wake her up so she can see what a white winter is. They arrive at the house, and Kristen takes sleepy Emily to her room, which once used to be hers. While Kristen is excited that her daughter will be sleeping in her childhood room, Emily doesn't seem as happy and even ignores everything her mother tells her. Kristen lays next to her as she continues to talk about her childhood, but Emily ends up falling asleep. In the morning, they rush to get to school on time, but Emily doesn't like that they're walking in the cold to get to it. Regardless of not wanting to go, Emily decides to attend, but not before sending Santa the letter she wrote for him. The bells ring, so they rush inside, where a teacher takes Emily to her class, after giving her the warmest welcome. Worried about the teacher, Kristen rushes to the principal's office, but the principal assures her that Emily's teacher is one of the more popular ones. Before she has a chance to leave, the principal lets her know about the PTA meeting, so Kristen decides to attend it. Walking through the halls to get to the meeting, Kristen ends up bumping into a rather familiar figure, the it girl of high school, Melissa. What an achievement, right? Before they have a chance to catch up, Melissa starts bragging about her life and how rich her dentist husband is. Regardless, Kristen congratulates her on having a big family, but Melissa interrupts to ask where her ring is. Feeling awkward, Kristen avoids answering the question, so Melissa comforts her by claiming that there's no need to settle. Not wanting to be around Melissa anymore, Kristen excuses herself to go to the PTA meeting, but Melissa stops her only to reveal that she is the head of the PTA. As if running into her hadn't been enough, Kristen had to listen to Melissa talk for an hour. As they head their way to the classroom, Melissa continues to brag about being the head of the school's pageant as well, but then she decides to stop talking about herself, surprisingly, only to ask Kristen about her hopes and dreams of making it in Los Angeles. Instead of feeding her with gossip, Kristen tells her that dreams change, which essentially isn't the answer Melissa wanted. Finally, they get to the classroom. On the other side, we see a nervous Emily finally get to her class. The teacher introduces her to the class and gives her a warm welcome. Given that Emily has no books yet, the teacher sits next to Abigail, who happens to be Melissa's daughter. Right as Emily sits down, Abigail asks where her dress is from, and Emily proudly reveals that her mom had made it. Instead of complimenting the pretty dress, Abigail calls the dress embarrassing, making her friend laugh. Over at the meeting, Melissa welcomes Kristen to the group as a new single parent. Upon discussing everyone's roles, Kristen raises her hand to ask whether her daughter can join the singing contest, as she loves to sing and dance. Unfortunately, Melissa lets her know that the casting is closed and that it wouldn't be fair to let her participate while the other kids won't have the opportunity. Instead of listening to Melissa, Kristen decides to take matters into her own hands. She finds the music teacher, who happens to be the handsome gentleman who is at her aunt's diner. He recognizes her instantly, but she struggles to remember who he is. Luckily, he mentions the frog they dissected together, and she finally remembers him. They laugh before she finally decides to ask him for a favor. She explains the situation, and he understands that Emily couldn't have known about the competition because she wasn't at school. Feeling relieved, Kristen thanks him and begins explaining that she tried telling Melissa the same, but he assures her that she hasn't changed. In the end, he is the music teacher, so he dictates how the music contest goes, which is why he tells Kristen to bring Emily after school for an audition. The bell rings, and as Emily is making her way down the hall, an older man with a white beard approaches her. He asks if it's her first day, and claims that it's evident by the look on her face. He introduces himself as Thomas Dunning, but before Emily has a chance to say her name, he appears to already know it. Confused, Emily asks how he knew her name, and he lets her know that he knows every child's name. Not only that, he claims to know everything as he mentions her awkward encounter with Abigail. He also knows that Emily is sad about not making any friends at school, so he asks her to take something negative and make it positive. She listens to his advice and hopes for a more positive experience the next day. However, as she heads her way, she remembers to thank him, but as she turns around, she doesn't see him there. Later in the day, Kristen comes to pick up Emily after school. Remembering the words of Thomas, Emily lets her mother know that she's made one friend on the first day of school, but she's positive she'll make more. Keeping it positive, Kristen points to the poster and tells Emily all about the audition. Emily accepts to participate, letting go of the fear of failure. Finally, they get to the audition, and Emily ends up singing A Christmas Carol. She sings very well, which is why Mr. Collier lets her participate in the contest, and they even settle on rehearsing the following day. After the audition, the girls head to Aunt Sarah for dinner. She hugs them both tightly, and because Emily's scored herself a position in the competition, she lets her know that she can have anything she likes. Christy and Sarah sit down to catch up, and Kristen tells her all about her encounter with Melissa. She also mentions Danny, and Sarah can't help but tell her about his high school crush on her. Kristen giggles, however. She wonders how she doesn't remember him at all. It all comes down to her being too focused on getting out of the small town, and him being obsessed with bands. Regardless, Kristen assures Aunt Sarah that she's happy to be back despite being overwhelmed. To help her out, Aunt Sarah suggests Kristen work as a waitress at the dinner. That way she can get a fresh start. Rehearsals begin the following day, which is why we see the kids with their parents waiting for their turns. While one kid does a magic trick that doesn't work out, we see Melissa reminding Abigail that she is the best before the little girl goes on stage. Finally, it's their turn, so Abigail joins her group on stage for their act. With the help of Melissa, they end up performing a great version of Dashing Through the Snow, while Emily sits shyly on the side, hoping to be called out rather than have to volunteer herself. By the time everyone auditions, time runs out for Emily, but she doesn't seem upset. Danny apologizes for not having the time for her, but she assures him that all is well, suggesting that he may need to add her to the group. Mr. Collier understands why she didn't jump at the opportunity to audition amongst the first ones, so he sits down next to her and explains that her stage fright is perfectly normal. She eases up a little bit, but what cheers her up is when he assures her that she wouldn't be a part of the competition if she didn't have a good voice. Switching the subject, Emily asks what her mother was like at school, given that she used to be classmates with Mr. Collier. Clearing his throat, he talked about her passion for fashion and how admirable her dreams were. Not interested in what he has to say about her talent, Emily asks what he thinks of her as a person. Seeing where the conversation is going, he denies answering her, so they head to the diner. Emily dines with her cousins while Kristen takes the time to thank Danny for bringing her to the diner. She also thanks him for cheering her up and finding a distraction for her not to think of LA. Danny assures her that all is well and even reminds her that she's a great mother. An order gets made, snapping Kristen back to reality. But before she goes back to work, she remembers Danny's old high school nickname. They used to call him Danny on the spot because he always knew the answers. He gets shocked, realizing that she did notice him when they were kids. As he heads out, he murmurs to himself about her remembering him, and little Emily listens to it all. The following morning, Emily seems to have forgotten her backpack, and we see Kristen running after her. Unfortunately, she misses her, but she runs into Thomas. Luckily, he agrees to give it to Emily, but before Kristen goes, he hands her a diary he believes to be Emily's. Looking at the writing, Kristen gets saddened because all it says is, "I miss my friend and home." Regardless, she thanks Thomas for returning it and heads to work. Knowing that her daughter is still upset, Kristen decides to cheer her up by bringing her to a Christmas tree market, where she can choose her tree. A smile grows on Emily's face as she opts for the biggest tree there is. However, upon looking, she sees Mr. Collier looking back at her. She gets excited and finally finds her tree, which happens to be from Ohio. Given that the tree is big, Danny suggests they load it up in his truck, but Kristen thinks that he's already done enough. He insists, so they load up the tree and head to their house. They manage to set up the tree while Emily looks for the ornaments. The tree starts leaning to the side, so they rush to hold it. Being so close to one another, the tension rises and they stare deeply into each other's eyes. Emily ruins the moment as she returns with one box of ornaments. Looking through it, Kristen notices that not everything is there, but she promises to find the rest of it soon. Before Danny has a chance to leave, Emily suggests he stay for dinner, knowing that her mother won't say no. So, Mr. Collier stays for dinner, and little Emily makes sure she gives them some alone time. Taking the chance as they're talking about the big change of switching states, Danny asks about Emily's father. Kristen gets saddened, and we soon find out why. Emily's dad passed away when she was just a couple of years old, and he is part of the reason Kristen has decided to move back to Ohio. Remembering how upset Emily is about moving, Kristen pulls out her journal and hands it to Danny for him to see what she's written. However, instead of focusing on her diary, he focuses on the poems she's written and realizes that there's a lot of potential. For that, he suggests Emily write her song for the contest, with his help of course. Kristen gets overwhelmed, and even reminds him that her daughter is a perfectionist, but he's willing to take on the challenge. Good news spreads fast, and Aunt Sarah is the first one to find out. She notices that Emily is happier than usual, so Kristen tells her all about the songwriting. However, she doesn't think that Emily is the only one that's enjoying spending time with him. Later in the afternoon, Kristen goes to pick Emily up, but she walks into chaos instead. The costumes for the performances are not like they're supposed to, and the show is only 2 weeks away. Kristen thinks about helping them out, but is sure that they won't like her getting into their business. Luckily, Emily suggests Kristen helps just as the principal walks in. Naturally, Melissa reminds everyone that she's in charge, but the principal lets Kristen have a say in her participation. Again, Melissa lets everyone know that there are only 2 weeks until the competition, claiming that Kristen wouldn't be able to do it by herself. Luckily, 2 mothers volunteer, and Kristen agrees to make the costumes. She gets to work immediately, and by the time Danny comes for practice, we see her sewing the dresses. Emily and Danny get to work. She shows him some of the lyrics she's already written. However, she's unsure of them. Naturally, the lyrics are about her letter to Santa and how fascinated she is by his ability to answer every child. Grabbing his guitar, Danny works his magic, and soon they come up with the melody. Some time goes by and Emily ends up falling asleep because she's tired. Kristen checks up on her and Danny jokes about the tree. She still wonders where the ornaments are, so Danny asks whether she's checked the pantry. They find them there, but as she opens the box, she sees the ornaments in pieces. Devastated, she sighs as tears start filling her eyes. Danny comforts her and even tries to make her feel better by saying that she has a chance to build a new future. But Kristen admits to being unsure of what her future is anymore. Danny sees that she's being too hard on herself, so he asks her to go easy on herself. However, she fears that even her hardest efforts may be not enough. Regardless of life's circumstances, he advises her not to destroy herself too much. Already feeling better, she lets Danny know he's a good guy, but he assures her that she makes it easy. Tension rises again, and they have their moment. Yet again, but they don't do anything about it. Wishing her a good night, he lets himself out. At school the following morning, we see all of the acts trying their fits. Because there's a group act, Kristen suggests she makes the girls matching costumes, and while everyone agrees, Abigail lets everyone know that her mother will buy her a costume that will stand out the most. Already expecting something like that from Melissa, Kristen nods her head and focuses on the other two girls. Instead of having a fitting, Emily lets Kristen know that she'll be practicing with Mr. Collier, and that is where we see her running. However, she gets stopped by Thomas in the hall, who tries to guess the song that she'll be singing. He is surprised to hear that she is writing a song, but even more surprised to hear that it's about her mother. She asks whether he'll be present at the competition, and he promises to be there. Before she has a chance to ask him something else, he disappears like the previous time. Night falls, and we see Emily turning the corner when she bumps into Danny. They catch up on the latest, and he refuses to say anything about the song, as Emily wants her to hear it at the grand premiere. Knowing that she won't get anything out of him, she decides to stop asking and be patient. They continue walking together, so Kristen takes the chance to ask how Danny has gotten into teaching. Surprisingly, Danny revealed that teaching hadn't been his dream. His dream for the longest time had been to become a rock star, and while he had a successful band that toured across the country, it had all become a bit too much for him. Around that time, he turned to teaching, and he wouldn't change it for the world now. In a way, Kristen relates to his story because she had wanted to become a designer for the longest time, but is enjoying living in Ohio. As they're having a heartfelt conversation about their paths in life, it starts snowing. Not having seen snow for such a long time, Kristen gets excited as she lets the snow fall on her. Some might say that she gets a bit too excited, as she starts yelling in the middle of the street about how much she loves the town. Time goes by as we get closer and closer to the competition. Kristen is working hard, making the girls feel like princesses. However, there's one girl who seems to be quite worried, Abigail, but little does she know what kind of a surprise is in store for her. Unexpectedly, Emily seems to have doubts about herself as well. Luckily, Danny notices, so when he asks her about it, she opens up about being scared that she'll choke up when she's on stage. He knows that she's secretive about her lyrics, but to overcome the issue, he suggests letting the other kids learn the chorus so that way she'll have someone to back her up if she chokes up. Although hesitant, she decides to give it a chance with Danny as the backup singer, and of course, it ends up sounding amazing. He takes her home in the evening, but Emily doesn't let him leave as she begs him to stay and help them decorate the tree. He agrees, and they end up having so much fun decorating the tree and spending time together. As they are admiring the tree, the doorbell can be hard, so Kristen goes to answer it. Opening the door, she is surprised to see Haley at her doorstep, so she hugs her tightly. Haley comes in, and Emily jumps into her arms as soon as she sees her. Seeing Danny standing next to the tree, Haley apologizes for interrupting, but he assures her that she's not interrupting anything. Kristen is surprised to see her best friend in Ohio, so she asks why she's here. Getting straight to the point, Haley reveals that she's been sending Kristen's lookbooks to some department store, and one of them had decided to take her as their designer. All Kristen has to do is agree, and all of her expenses will be covered for them to move back to Los Angeles. Naturally, all three of them get excited when they hear that someone wants to sell Kristen's designs. Danny even makes sure to congratulate her. However, all of them get worried once Haley says that they have to move back to Los Angeles. Not able to take it, Danny wishes them a good night and heads out as it all becomes a bit much for him. The same can be said for Emily, but who would have thought that she'd be getting upset over having to move back to Los Angeles? The following morning, we see her eating lunch alone at school when she gets approached by Thomas. By now, she's already figured out that Thomas is Santa, so she lets him know that she might have made a mistake by mailing her first wish. She doesn't want to move back to Los Angeles because she loves living in Ohio and spending time with Danny and her mother. Although he stays neutral, Thomas advises her to sing the song because only then does she know that wish is truly in her heart. It's finally time for the long-awaited ceremony, and while Danny is avoiding Kristen at all costs, we see all of the contestants preparing to hit the stage. Naturally, there's one person that's causing some trouble. Flipping the story because Abigail's dress is not glamorous enough, Melissa claims that Kristen didn't make a dress for her daughter because she wants the other girls to outshine her. Finding her words ridiculous, Kristen reveals that Abigail had told her that Melissa would be getting her a store-bought dress. Melissa tries to make her the bad guy by claiming that she shouldn't have listened to a child, but luckily Kristen had made an extra dress. Visibly upset for not humiliating Kristen, Melissa stays shocked at Kristen's dedication. Surprisingly, she even compliments her work ethic and her designs. Taking the chance, the principal suggests she make Kristen a permanent member of the PAT, and Melissa ends up agreeing. Just minutes before they have to go on stage, Kristen has a couple of words with Emily. She only wants to focus on her performance for the night, but she promises that they'll have a chat about everything in the morning. Emily agrees. She knows that her mother won't make a big decision without consulting her ever again. Soon, they hear Danny's voice letting everyone know that the show will start in a couple of minutes, so Kristen gets to her seat. After introducing Aunt Sarah to Haley, she joins Danny at the piano. He is surprised to see her, but she lets him know that she's only come to wish him luck. As she begins talking about the moving situation, the principal comes on stage, so she rushes back to her seat. Welcoming everyone to the ceremony, she gives special thanks to Melissa for organizing it, but makes sure to thank Kristen as well. The first group goes on stage in their sparkling dresses while performing the song Jingle Bells. As expected, they do an amazing job. Before the magician gets on stage, Sarah and Haley start asking Kristen about Danny, assuming that he has a crush on her. Given their situation, Kristen finds it hard to believe that. However, Haley assures her that he's acting cold because he doesn't want her to go to Los Angeles. And seeing that she doesn't want to go either, she encourages her to go up and tell him everything. Gathering the strength, Kristen sits next to him and pours her heart out. She lets him know that she's not raking the job and that she plans on working from Ohio. Not only that, she comes clean about her feelings, letting him know that she's never felt how she feels for him. Leaning in for a kiss, it seems that they're finally about to have their first kiss, but they get interrupted by the principal, yet again. However, this time it's up for Emily's performance. Finally, Kristen gets to hear Emily's song for the first time, and as the little girl starts performing, Kristen couldn't be prouder. Surprisingly, the song is upbeat and funky, making the crowd dance, including Santa. And while everyone is enjoying, the talented Emily, Danny, and Kristen finally get to kiss as the song comes to an end. After a successful ceremony, we see the trio at Christmas, the first of many to come.